Hello. Hello everyone. To you all from Justice for Palestinians Living in Spa. Good to see a nice turnout. Well, I just asked our engineer to check. That sounds like it's better. Is that better? I'll start again. Warm welcome to everybody from Justice for Palestinians Living in Spa. Good to see such a big crowd. This is the third event in our series of Pathways to Peace, and we're very pleased tonight to recognise two Jewish speakers, and I think this reinforces our feeling that we're not all influenced by the Israeli propaganda, and for those of us who are Jews, are not swayed or agreeing with the old established Jewish organisations who say that they speak for us, because they certainly do not. A quick word about our origins. In 2009, in January 2009, just after the Israelis had launched the operation Cast led on Gaza with a huge loss of life, seems a small number compared with now. A group of us who were all signatories for the Jews for Justice for Palestinians, which was largely a London-based organisation, met together and decided it was really time to start raising awareness locally with what was happening in Israel Palestine. We called a meeting we called a meeting, and there are not very many Jews in the Leamington area, so it was a widely advertised meeting, and we got immediate response from a wide group of people, some people of faith, some people not of faith. We also now have Palestinian members of the group who give us wise counsel and a steadying hand. Since we founded, we've had a wide range of speakers. For instance, we've had Hussam Zomlot, who's the head of the Palestinian mission to the United Kingdom, who's spoken here twice. We've had many other speakers, which used to be an annual event, as I'm sure many of you know. We always had a very solid presence. We always spoke on both days from the stage, and at the end of the second day, we always held a large public meeting. In COVID times, we had to rely on Zoom, as did many others. Now we have meetings on Zoom and also, as tonight, meetings in person. Since October the 7th, instead of our monthly vigil, which is what we were doing outside the town hall in Leamington, we have had 73 weekly vigils, both in Leamington, in Kenilworth and in Warwick, and we shall continue to do so for some time, I fear. For the first time, both our speakers are Jewish, and will be introduced by our chair for tonight, Georgina Halabi, who herself has Jewish and Palestinian roots. And Haim, as you probably know, some of us are also members of JMP, so over to you, Georgina.
Thanks, Sally. Can I just get the mic? Thank you.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Pathway to Peace. I'd like to start off by asking you to imagine the ceasefire has held, our tireless resistance has yielded fruits, and war criminals have been held accountable. We are now on a pathway for sustainable peace. But what does this peace look like, and how did we get here? Today, we're lucky to have two esteemed guest speakers to share their view on this subject. Professor Haim Bresheeth is the child of Holocaust survivors and is the author, inter alia, of An Army Like No Other about the IDF. A bit of shameless plugging here. It's an excellent book. He is a member of the One Democratic State campaign, a founder of the Jewish Network for Palestine, and a convener of the Convivencia Project. Did I say that correctly? Yes. Thank you. Dr. Magen Inon is a teacher whose parents were killed in the Hamas attack of 7th of October 2023. Since then, he has become a leading voice for peace between Israelis and Palestinians, and is part of the team of Yachad, whose primary mission is to empower British Jews to support a political resolution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And before I hand over to our first speaker, Haim, I'll just run you through the agenda for tonight. So each speaker will have 10 minutes to set out their analysis of the current situation and their vision for the future. I then have a few questions that we've pulled together for each to reply, which we'll do so together. We will then open up the discussion at about 10 to 8 to the audience, and we should aim to finish at about 8:30. Now, I'm going to invite you all to approach this discussion with a curious mind, because I'm sure there are a lot of strong differing views out there. But what chance do we have of true peace if we can't agree to disagree agreeably? Thank you. And I'll pass over now to Professor Haim Bresheeth.
Thank you very much, Georgina. Georgina's chairmanship is really important, if you can say chairmanship, a woman, because she, in her history, in her personal history, is an example of something I would like to talk about later on, which is called convivencia. Please remember the word, we'll come back to it in 10 minutes or so. I'm ex-Israeli. I lived in Britain since 1972. I came to Britain to do a PhD and go back to Israel. I didn't realize that I will stay here most of my life, and I'm very glad I did. I was not an anti-Zionist when I came to Britain. I was not a Zionist either. I was very uneasy about Israel. I partook in 3 wars before I started thinking about anti-Zionism. There was the 1967 war, there was the war of attrition in the 70s, and the war in 1973. I was already in Britain. I went back to fight it without meaning to. At the time, I was working in the Israeli embassy as a security officer. I was a student. My wife was also working in the embassy, my wife then. She roused me one morning in 1973, phoning from the embassy saying, "The war has started, I booked you up on a flight." When I tell this story to British people, they don't quite understand it. Israelis understand it, but I didn't want to go, but I did. And that made me an early anti-Zionist. I came back to Britain and joined a group called Matzpen, which was the first ever anti-Zionist group anywhere. At the height of its history, it had less than 200 people in Israel and abroad. When I returned to London in 1973 after the war, I knew all the anti-Zionists in Britain. I mean, all 10 of them. Now we're talking about many tens of thousands. So that is quite an incredible change. Now, just something about my history. Both my parents survived Auschwitz, and they were the kind of people that talked about it incessantly. Most of the people that survived did not talk about it. My parents were the talkative kind because they wanted their children to be witnesses to genocide so that they will speak about it so it doesn't ever happen again. They never mentioned never again for Jews, of course, never again. So I was well, I grew up in a place called Jabalia, or Jabilia as we called it as children, a little town to the south of Jaffa, a modern little town, delightful place. 95% of the Palestinians there were expelled in 1948 before we came. I was born in Italy in a refugee camp, what was called a DP camp, displaced person. And my first 2 years were in Italy in that refugee camp. And probably that has prepared me to understand what the Palestinians are going through. To complete this education, we lived in Jabalia, which actually was a town totally made of survivors of the Holocaust and survivors of the Nakba. As children, we spoke Hebrew and Arabic. We had no idea that there was something wrong about Arab children, friends. And they had probably no idea that there was something wrong with us. Of course, we were more wrong than them. But I don't think they knew that. We were all children and we spoke the two languages. And interestingly, at the time was a law that wherever there are more than 20% of the population who are minorities, meaning Palestinians, both languages have to be taught at school. I have to say the level of teaching Arabic was really horrible. But at least we lived together, we played together, we went to each other's homes, and so did our parents. So this was not Israel. If it was anywhere, it was Palestine. Of course, the name wasn't used then. So that was a preparation for the rest of my life, but I didn't realize that. And I wanted very much to be an Israeli, but the test of being Israeli is going to the army. And I didn't want to go to the army. But I did not realize what it will take for me to not go to the army. It's really facing the whole of society. I was supposed to go to the army in 1964, and indeed I went, and I was an officer in 1967. I didn't know that on arrival in 1948 on a boat from Rome, my father refused to be part of the Israeli army. He wouldn't get drafted. He did not want to kill, and he definitely didn't want to get killed after he survived Auschwitz. And he told them that he will not join the army. He was one of the first refusers. We don't know if he was first or second, but he was one of the few refusers. I didn't know that. He never told me that. His brother, who was a communist, told me that when I was already 25 and already an anti-Zionist. I wish I knew that. It would have given me energy and courage to refuse to serve, but I didn't know. Now, I want to end by saying this. I don't need to, neither does Magen, tell you what is happening in Gaza. You obviously are here because you know, you appreciate, you are horrified like us. But I think I would like partly today to be able to speak or to answer questions about the future. Now, I'm a historian, and historians don't deal with the future, they deal with the past. So this is a dangerous move. But we are now, most of the historians in Britain who are dealing with the Middle East are now talking about the end of Zionism. And I would like to be able to speak about that because a political solution is now a must. 2 million people are living in the rubble. There is nothing to support their life. They will not survive there. those that will not die from the bombs will die from disease or starvation. There is nothing left in Gaza to support human life. Even President Trump said that. So I want to start by saying that I've been an anti-Zionist for 55 years, which is most of my life. Now that there are so many of us that understand that it's not what Israel has done since the 7th of October, with what Zionism has done since the beginning of Zionism 125 years ago. That is the problem. The problem is not what happened on the 7th of October or after. The problem starts a long time before that. I think I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Professor Haim. You founded a real movement. And over to Dr. Magen.
Hi everyone, good evening. Apologies, I have a bit of a cold, so if my voice weakens through the evening, apologies for that. Haim and me have some agreements and disagreements, so it will be an interesting evening, I hope. You mind if I ask, how old are you, Haim?
79.
79, so my dad was just 78. So I think there's also an interesting connection there. I'll start with a very personal story. So yesterday evening, I have 3 kids. They're 8, 5, and 2. I was reading some books to my youngest, who's a very cheeky boy. And he kept reading me books. And after the third one, I saw that there is a weird coincidence that he's only picking books that my mom gave my kids. And in those books, there's my mother's writing. And some of those books are so, one of them specifically is so old that it has the names of me and my siblings. I'm the youngest of 5 siblings, so our name is dedicated to us. And now I'm reading it to my kids, and it got me very emotional about the things that were taken away from my kids. I don't know how many of you are grandparents, but my parents were very involved as grandparents, and it's a huge loss to me and the family, and especially I'm thinking of my kids. So my family, even though my granddad was a member of the Israeli Parliament, and it would be interesting. One of the things he's done after the Second World War is going to Italy to organize refugees. So maybe we'll talk about it later. But my dad took a completely different direction. He was, and I'm not joking, the best farmer in Israel. And if you ask me, I can explain why. But he was so professionally an agronomist, was so highly regarded in the agricultural field in Israel that now there's a sesame brand named after him, and a wheat brand, and a watermelon brand. Really, he was amazing at his job. And my mom was a teacher and a kindergarten teacher, and spent an artist in later years, also a pillar of the community. I'm going back to the morning of October 7th. I moved to London about 10 years ago, similarly started a PhD here, ended up staying a bit longer. And the family WhatsApp group is starting to buzz in the morning, and we realize that something is going on. My brother is asking my parents if everything is okay, and they write back that they're that they hear bombs and shooting shooting going on, but they're locked the house and they're in the safe room. And that was the last we heard from them. And it took a while until we realized they didn't survive the attack. In Nativ Asara, it's a moshav, it's a communal village. 20 members of the community were murdered within an hour. And the next day, I already took a flight back to Israel to be with my siblings, with my family, for the Shiva. If you're not familiar with Jewish tradition, there's usually after a loved one dies, there's a week-long mourning where you invite friends and family to be with you. For various reasons, but we were the first ones from almost the entire area who had a Shiva, so many people came to be with us, including friends and from the village and from nearby villages who lost family members themselves. And because my parents always had friends and good links to all the various communities in Israel Palestine, very good friends of us from the Bedouin community and from Palestinian communities, and everybody was sitting together. It was a real testament to the kind of family and the kind of values that I grew up with. On the last day, me and my siblings sat down and we had a list of things that we had to decide and to go through. And one of the things on the top of the list was what are we telling the media? We felt that we're going to get a lot of media attention, partly because my brother has been politically an activist for many years, and his business has attracted a lot of media attention, and many journalists came to be with us in the Shiva, and we knew there's going to be quite a lot of media attention, and we raised the issue of, okay, what do we want to say as a family? Do we have a message? And if you ask me later, I think I have an explanation why it took us a minute. It was very, very quick for us to say, like, we don't want revenge. That revenge is not the answer. And it's not the kind of legacy that our parents would have wanted. And so I think immediately from that moment on, me and my brother and my sisters have been very vocal about the fact that we don't want revenge, and we think that to respect our parents' legacy would be to strive towards a diplomatic process, a diplomatic solution, and peace. And that has been our message ever since. We had a few surprises along the way. One of them that was very quick was that once we, and again, we didn't expect anything. We said, we felt the need to put our voice out there, partly because we heard other voices who were calling for revenge and were hijacking our tragedy to advance their own political agenda. It was important for us to put our voices out there. And also, almost immediately, we got in, some Palestinian people got in touch with us and wanted to share platforms and to work together and became partners and really good friends. And so my brother's been doing a lot of work with Aziza Boussama, who's quite a leading Palestinian voice for peace. I worked with Aziz a few times, working with Hamza Awaude, who's become a friend, and just next week he's coming to the UK, and we're going to a few universities to speak in, and there's quite a lot of political lobbying. And part of that is also me coming here today through an organization called Yachad that I found to be a really small and efficient organization that I love working with. I keep saying every time I speak, there's nothing you'll say that will offend me. So I welcome difficult questions and I think we should air out some of the very difficult thoughts and very difficult feelings that we all have. And I welcome questions from you.
Thank you for your openness, and I want to acknowledge how out of the tragedy, such love and compassion and bravery. So I have a couple of questions that I'd love to put to you both to get your opinion on. So the first one is, how can the majority of Israeli Jews be persuaded that the current policy cannot bring sustainable security? I hand over to you, Haim, first.
I'm sorry to say, I think the answer must be, it cannot be persuaded. When President Botha of South Africa decided that the end of apartheid must come, and he decided that after decades of pressure, he did not go to the country of the whites, of course, because the blacks were not part of it, and he didn't ask them what to do. And later on in interviews, people asked him, journalists asked him, why didn't you go to the country and ask people if they agree to end apartheid? Now, he was a very, very strong supporter of apartheid for all his life. And what he said was, which was the truth, I knew that I'll get the answer I don't want to hear. They will tell me we want apartheid to continue. So I decided I'm not going to ask them, and I'm going to do it, despite their disagreement. And what is very interesting, everyone that goes to South Africa will tell you that people are all saying we were always against apartheid. Of course they weren't. So in a sense, if you think about a solution in Israel, what are the figures? Okay, the figures according to Tel Aviv University 10 months ago were the following: 97.3% of Jews, the Palestinians were not asked. The Palestinian Israelis, the Israeli citizens who are Palestinians were not asked what they think, because they don't matter and they didn't exist, yeah? So the Jews who were asked, about 10,000 by the Tel Aviv University poll, voted by 97.3, you can read it in Arabs if you do a search, that what Israel is doing in Gaza is correct. Now, there was 1 point something, that almost 2% who voted against this. But of the 97%, 54% said Israel is not being hard enough in Gaza. Just think about that. Now, I want to say, because we can't spend a long time on it, there is nothing Jewish about genocide. If anything, Jews have never committed or partook in genocide in 2,000 years of suffering in Europe. Of course, they didn't suffer in the Arab world. In the Arab world, there was no anti-Semitism. There was no Holocaust. There were no pogroms, apart from, 2 or 3 cases that we all kind of know about. I'm a historian. This is the history. Yeah, the history is that Jews and Arabs lived in Palestine of the 3 religions in harmony for 2,000 years. And you know what are the 2 things that stopped that harmony? One of them is the Crusades. All the Jews, all the Muslims, but also all the Christians of Jerusalem, 60,000 people, were killed by the Crusaders. And you might ask, why did they kill the Christians? Well, they killed the Christians for a very good reason, because the Christians lived in peace with Jews and Muslims, and therefore they were non-kosher. They were treif. they were killed. That was one occasion that the life together was disturbed, and the other occasion was the beginning of Zionism. So for 2,000 years, Jews lived not just in Palestine, but in North Africa, in Western Asia, as far as India, as far as Afghanistan, in Southern Europe, in the Balkans, places that later became Yugoslavia, and of course in Europe itself, in Spain, for 800 years, there was a convivencia. Convivencia means life together. And the convivencia meant that Jews, Christians, and Muslims lived together in harmony for most of the 800 years that this period lasted until the Muslims lost Spain in 1492, finally. And then all the Jews and Muslims were ejected. So, bottom line is this: Jews have lived in Europe and suffered for hundreds of years, some of them more than 1,000 years. My parents come from Poland, and the Jewish life in Poland starts in the 11th century, when they were invited, Jews were invited from other parts of Europe to come to Poland because their contribution was appreciated. In those 1,000 years of Jews in Poland, they suffered quite a lot, but they never actually were involved in violence against other people. So if you look at the Arab world, of course they were not involved in violence because there was no reason to be involved in violence. So I'm saying very clearly, there is nothing Jewish about genocide. There is nothing Jewish about the Jewish state. There is nothing Jewish about ethnic cleansing. There is nothing Jewish about apartheid. I could go on. All the texts of the Jewish religion, the important texts, are totally opposed to what is happening today. And also to what happened before the stealing of the land, the killing of the people in 1948, before as well. So if you're talking Judaism, it's nothing to do with Zionism. And what happened in Britain, and I'm sure there are Jews here, remember that until 1967, only 1% to 1.5% of the Jewish population was Zionist. And this military victory has made a lot of people Zionists for the wrong reason. They have abandoned Judaism and they have replaced it with the army and the state of Zionism. And I want to end by saying this. The only way, and we might disagree on this, I take it, and it would be interesting to disagree. The only way in which we can live together with the Arabs of Palestine, Muslims and Christians, is through a future convivencia after a de-Zionization of Palestine. We have to de-Zionize not just the institutions, the powers, but the minds of people. And this is going to be very difficult. It's going to be very painful, but it's going to be safer than suffering genocide and affecting genocide. Nothing can be as bad as what we are living today and what we are all going to see in the next few years. Because we know what they want. They want all the Palestinians out of Palestine. And they are actually getting support for it from Mr. Starman, the lawyer, the human rights lawyer. The only country that is run by a human rights lawyer does not allow rights to humans. I was arrested as a terrorist because I spoke in support of Palestine and in support of international law, and international law requires, demands, expects all of us to stop genocide, all of us to report people who commit genocide, all of us, to do all we can as people, as institutions, as states, as societies, to make sure that genocide is never happening. And this government, like every other British government, this might not be nice to listen to, for 125 years supported Zionism, and since 1916 were the enablers of Zionism, and since then they stayed an enabler of Zionism. Before the United States even looked in the direction, before Europe looked in the direction of Palestine, Britain has already enabled Zionism. So, to end, if we don't remove the disease, we know there is no medicine. Yeah, you have to remove the disease, and the disease is a political ideology, a political practice which is racist, which always was racist, which demands the removal of the indigenous population in a similar way that North Americans have removed the indigenous population by killing them. The French did in Algeria, the South Africans did in South Africa, and so on, the list goes on. So Israel is not the first colony, it's the last colony. There will not ever be new colonies. And the Archbishop Tutu said, none of us are free until Palestine is free. And I can tell you that every day I believe and experience the lack of freedom to speak, the lack of freedom to write. I'm censored by, people canceling meetings where I'm going to speak. I'm not alone. Avi Schlein, Ilan Pape, and a lot of the historians here in Britain are supporting Palestine, and they are cancelled. So there is no freedom of speech. And if you speak like I did in November, you're arrested. And now there are more than 300 people under terror accusations in Britain. And the people from Palestine Action, some of them are now spending the third year in prison, and they have not faced a jury and judge yet. 3 years before the trial, and who knows how long they will. There is no freedom as long as the Palestinians are not free. And this is something we must do. We must change the society in Britain totally so that it's democratic again. Thank you.
Thank you.
I should have probably said that we have about 3 minutes per answer, but I didn't want to lead to a freedom of speech. It was so beautiful. And you actually happened to cover the second question, which was how should war crimes be handled in a post-peace setting? Should it be the South African model or the Yugoslav ones? But you talked about de-Zionizing Israel and how it worked in South Africa to just do it. So can I hand over now to Dr. Magen to answer the question, how can the majority of Israeli Jews be persuaded that the current policy cannot bring sustainable security? And any thoughts that you might have on how war crimes should be handled? One by one.
I might need a reminder. So let me paint a slightly different picture. We have both, of course, in Gaza, the devastation is horrible. The Palestinian nation is a nation experiencing trauma. At the same time, Israel's population is experiencing trauma as well. And I'm not making an equivalence here, right? But the situation is such that if you are living in Israel, you don't really see what is going on in Gaza. So it might make it easier for you to support what the IDF is doing there because you don't see what is actually happening. You don't, it's not on the mainstream media, it's not on your social media feed. So the vast majority of Israelis just don't know to a large extent. Those who know try to find rationalizations and justify it to themselves, but much of that is coming out of fear. For many Jews living in Israel, October 7 was rhyming with the worst atrocities that the Jewish people have suffered. And so the pictures that were coming out from the communities where I grew up were such that threw away, and this was taken advantage by the most extreme right politicians or the prime minister in Israel, who were using that fear and that pain and that trauma to provoke ideas of revenge and hitting back, inflicting suffering, partly because that was where the population was, but partly because this was their way to stay in power. Okay. Not only, and again, I don't want to make it the equivalence here. There is the suffering in Gaza, the innocent people in Gaza who were killed and are suffering is horrendous, it's immense. But there is also real suffering in Israel, enough for the politicians to play on. And so I would say, it comes out even when the Israeli leadership has basically decided to sacrifice the hostages. Okay, so let alone they don't care about innocent Palestinian lives, they don't care about the hostages' lives either. Okay, for the current political leadership in Israel, lives just don't matter as much as land and power. And so the Israeli population in many ways is suffering, not just from what Hamas did on October 7th, but also from the worst political leadership the country had, I think, in ever. But my job is to bring hope and optimism. And so I think the vast majority of Israelis are already convinced that the status quo doesn't provide security, that the status quo, and what can move the needle is talking to the majority of Israelis, not in terms of moral, what's the moral thing to do, as much as I think it is the moral, okay, that the occupation should end for moral reasons. But for many Israelis, they will be convinced if you say it's in your interest as part of a much larger Middle East diplomatic process to set up a Palestinian state that can live in peace alongside Israel. And if you ask it in that way, I think the majority of Israelis agree. If I remember correctly, it's like something like in the 70s, the 70%. And so it's a real question of how do you frame it. One thing and one anecdote that I keep going back to, and maybe Haim, you can say more, but after 1973, the Yom Kippur October War between Israel and Egypt, which up until the current war in Gaza was the worst war Israel has ever experienced, if you'd ask Israelis who lived in Israel in 1973, if in 5 years' time there will be peace with Egypt, the vast majority would say no. And I think this is where we are at the moment. Yes, if you ask people if there will ever be peace with Palestine, now they would say no, because you're asking someone who's been experiencing war for more than a year. But if what happened with Egypt is that Sadat, then Egyptian president, came to the Israeli parliament, gave a speech basically reaching his hand in peace, and that changed popular opinion in Israel. And a peace treaty was signed 5 years after the war. And I think we need to keep that in mind that there peace is possible. Begin is quoted as saying peace is inevitable. So it's a matter of time. And if we think in those terms, and I agree with much of what Haim is saying, but I mean the son of a farmer, I think in very pragmatic terms. I'm trying to think, you cannot convince your plants to grow. You need to give them the right environment. You need to speak in their terms. And if what will convince Israel is talking in terms of interest, economic, security, whatever, then I think definitely we have many partners we can work with. And I'm at least hopeful that we can separate between what I agree. If I had to, put a title, I would say I'm both a Zionist and an anti-Zionist. I think you can separate between the most extreme groups within Israeli Jewish society and rightfully say these are just insane people who should be marginalized, sanctioned, put in prison, right? And the majority of Jewish Israelis who either willingly, blindly, they don't really care about the occupation, right? Or they actually resist it. But I think if we talk in terms of interest, I think we can convince people that it is in their interest to pursue peace. And this is something that at certain points in Israel's even recent history, there were opportunities that sadly failed. But just because something fails once and even 10 times doesn't mean we shouldn't try again.
Thank you, Magen. I'd like to open up to the floor for questions and ask if we've got a microphone that we could bring over to start with Barclay over there. You want to? Thanks, Andy.
Got that voice. Does that help?
The camera so they can hear you.
Just try to speak, I think.
1, 2, 3, 4.
No.
No. No.
Do you want to take this microphone for a second, Barclay?
Sorry.
Use this one.
Do you want to take this one?
Thank you.
Oh, it's on. We've got both on.
Okay, I've got this one now, so I can hear it. You can hear me now. Okay, so Ilan Pape, you mentioned it earlier. He, of course, for those people who don't know, he's an author, a very distinguished historian, great influencer of all kinds of people, including me. He has recently, well, for the past 17 months now, been saying very strongly indeed, very forcefully, and has made cogent arguments that we are now in a period where we're starting to see the failure, if you like, of Zionism. He said that it would involve a lot of blood, a lot of hardship, a lot of terror and all the rest of it, destruction and so on. I'd love to hear your views on whether you agree with him. And if you do agree with him, what shape the outcome might be in Zionism failing in Israel.
Thank you. Who would like to take this question?
There's a feedback loop somewhere.
Can we swap over the microphones again? Thank you. This one's making a lot of sound. Thank you. Yeah.
I have a more general point. Sorry, I think we can spend a lot of time arguing about particular words. Sometimes I would use the word Zionism, I would use the word genocide, sometimes I won't. I think we have to be in the frame of mind that what we really want to do is change reality, not winning the argument. And so I find that sometimes arguing whether what Zionism means, we can spend an hour now. What exactly does it mean? And that, yeah, if you understand it like this, man, then maybe I'm a Zionist. If you understand it like that, then I would be an anti-Zionist. I think it would just be a waste of time. We need to ask ourselves, what should we do in order to change reality on the ground? Okay? And I don't care if someone calls themselves a Zionist or an anti-Zionist. I'm asking them, what can you do in order to change reality on the ground? Because I think otherwise, terms can be abused for political agenda that we completely disagree with. You know, the extreme right in Israel is calling themselves the religious Zionists. I would claim they're not religious and they're not Zionists. But who cares? You know, they claim those terms. And so that now people who want to criticize them might say, oh, I'm not, you know, I don't want to be seen as a religious Zionist or whatever. My take would be look for reasons why and where you can cooperate with people, even if those people are fucking assholes. And a general reminder that you make peace with enemies. So if I think we can talk to Hamas, who sent terrorists to my village, and I think we can and we should talk to them and we should make peace with them, I think we should also remind ourselves that we have so-called enemies within our group, and we should talk to them as well. We don't have, I mean, again, I'm not saying agree with everyone, I'm not saying accommodate everyone. There's certain opinions and definitely actions that people should be responsible for and pay for. But just because someone is branding themselves in a particular term, for me, it doesn't matter. I'm asking myself, how can I cooperate with that person to achieve maybe the 1% that we do agree on? And I think this idea of looking for reasons why you should partner up with people, should cooperate with people rather than look for reasons why you shouldn't, can build a coalition that would actually change reality on the ground.
Thank you. You want to say something?
Yeah. Magen said that most Israelis don't see what's happening in Gaza and don't want to know what's happening in Gaza. When my parents suffered in the 40s in the ghetto and then in Auschwitz and then in 2 other camps after Auschwitz, to which they were marched on foot, a death march, the world didn't know about the Holocaust. It was one of the best kept secrets of the Germans. And when news came out in 1942 and in 1943, the Zionists actually in Europe, especially in Britain, but definitely in Palestine, have silenced the reports about the immensity of the murder. And of course, a lot of the other parts of society in Britain, you know, the Tories, were not interested in publicizing it. I always thought, when my parents told me about the camps, that if only people knew at the time what is happening, it wouldn't happen because everyone will be against it. Friends, how wrong I was. We now are seeing the worst genocide in my lifetime. Everyone knows about it. Little children are seeing other little children dissected by bombs. They are seeing the horror on their telephones. There is not a human being on this earth that doesn't know what Israel is doing. And have we saved a single child with our marching? Have we saved a single person in Gaza or in the West Bank by being active? We have to admit that we have not managed to do that because our leaders refuse to do so. So we've been marching now for 16 months with no results. Never before, anywhere, did people march for 16 months without a break. And now we've done it, and we'll probably continue to do it for another 16 months if Israel is anything to go by, and nothing will happen. In Israel, Gent is saying to us that the right is obviously one of the things we do agree on, is that the right is beyond a human scale. The scale of humanity is not for them. But I want to argue with you that 97% support for a genocide is marking the Israelis not for 16 months, but forever. This is the most democratic genocide that has ever taken place. Nobody went to all the Germans in Germany and said, do you agree? If you don't mind, we'll kill all the Jews for you. Do you agree? And nobody's done that process. And nobody has done that process anywhere else. But in Israel, they've measured how many people supporting. And this is Tel Aviv University, my alma mater, I studied there. I know the people who did the research. 97% is 97%. This is not a question of Zionist or non-Zionist. People don't know if they are Zionist or non-Zionist in Israel. That's not important, as Magen has said. What is important is they are democratically supporting genocide. They are democratically supporting ethnic cleansing. The leader of the left, a general, of course, who would be the leader of the left if not a general, is actually supporting this. Is actually supporting the taking of land that happens in Syria, that happens in Lebanon. Israel is still in parts of Lebanon. Israel is still, since 1967, in parts of Syria. The left is supporting the agenda of Netanyahu against the Palestinians. They don't support Netanyahu. People in the streets are against Netanyahu, not because they are against what is happening in Palestine. So there's no way of leaving this. Now, Ilan Pape, a very dear friend. I'm a historian. I'm thinking about facts. I don't want to work with hope alone, because we know what that led to. We now are seeing a society not in crisis, I'm talking about Israeli society, not in crisis, but what I would call socio-political psychosis. A society that supports genocide by that type of percentage is a sick society. And there is no medicine for that society. And I think that to suggest otherwise has produced the results that we're now seeing. Israel was never more racist than it is now. Israel was never more murderous. These are facts. The media in Israel was never more supine than it is today. Now about what I think about Ilan Pape's, I totally agree with it. I've written about it for the 16 months. I've published about 10 or 11, I don't remember myself, pieces since then. And I also said, and Ilan said, and Avi Schlein has said, and a whole number of people have said, this is the end of Zionism. It will not be very pleasant. It will not be very fast. It will not be very safe, because they will fight. The worst time of an empire is when it's going. This is what happens now with the American empire. It's very dangerous when it's going down, and nothing can stop it because it's too strong. And at the moment, no one actually can stop Israel because the people that could stop it are not going to do it. They're actually fueling the fire. So I don't think that we can actually have a peace between Israel and Palestine. In other words, that there will be two states, one by the other. If we were about 50 or 60 years ago, I supported it then as a young man. I don't support this now because Israel means Zionism. There is no other form of Israeli nationalism that I know of. And believe me, I've done the research for 50-something years. So if we are talking about leaving Zionism alive, we are leaving the disease alive. It is now the Israeli society is very sick. Otherwise, it would not support genocide. It is not a normal society which supports genocide. If you went to most people in Britain and said, do you support the killing of all the migrants? So even despite the fact that a lot of them are racist, most British people will not support something like this. And leave alone the fact that in Palestine, it's the opposite. It is the Zionists who came to take the land, and the Palestinians lived there for thousands of years before. Actually, Ben Gurion wrote a book in 1915, 110 years ago. You know what? The book was written in Yiddish. Ben Gurion later became a great enemy of the Yiddish language. He wrote a book with someone who, his friend, who became the first president, the second president of Israel, Ben Tzvi. And what did they claim in that book? That the Palestinians of Palestine are the old Hebrews that stayed there after Rome has taken over and after a lot of people have left Palestine by choice, they were not expelled by Rome. And so what he claimed is that these are the people who were the ancient Hebrews. I think he was right. So the Palestinians have lived there before Christianity, before Islam, and actually before Judaism. This is an amalgam of all the social groups that existed in Palestine. And now, of course, some of them are Muslim, some of them are Christian, some of them are Jewish before Zionism. They live together. I am suggesting to you that the only solution is a convivencia of one state in Palestine from the river to the sea, where all people are equal, where Zionism is acted against and disallowed, and where we have a society which is democratic. Now, if you say to me this is not possible, you are denying history. You're denying more than 2,000 years of history.
Thank you. There's a gentleman over there, but if you pass the mic.
Yeah, I'm just conscious of, I think a lot of this is to do with kind of human behavior, the way that we act to one another, because I get the feeling that, as the speaker said, both societies are kind of traumatized by this at the moment. So although you're saying that 97% of Israelis kind of support this, but they're supporting this in a traumatized state. And I kind of feel if any of us have put, well, like myself, if I was put in that situation, I'd probably feel the same, whether I'm born in Israel or if I was born in a refugee camp. And I think it's a lot, to me, the dynamics is to do with, a lot of apathy. A lot of society has apathy. a lot of British society has apathy about things, and it's only small numbers of people influenced and people who've got power. And I think those dynamics is the same in most parts of the world. And it's a question of trying to relinquish that power, influencing that power, the people who get the power, so that they become more ethical in the way they make their decisions and more cooperative. And it's all this kind of drive for power that distorts things, because the majority of people generally are looking for the security, generally looking to get on with their lives. And I mean, obviously, we all have bad sides to us that can be drawn out, and it's up to and cooperation of people in power not to bring out negative sides in people. But they don't. They tend to manipulate things out of self-interest. And I think it's recognizing that human behavior tends to do this, whether it's in Palestine, whether it's in Sudan, whether it's in Syria or other countries. And it's a question of trying to redefine that the recognize the destruction of what power can do and what good things it could do. But that's an observation.
Thank you. I'd like to pick up on a point within that, which was about, that we obviously all have, there's a commonality in our human behavior. We're all humans, but at the same time, it's looking at the influence of external power in the situation. Do either of you have anything to say about that with regards to international interference, for want of a better word?
First of all, I completely buy into the ideal that Haim described. I just think we, at the moment, we need to convince people to have the political will to go to something like a one state. Okay, so generally when I'm saying what I'm doing is not trying to say the one state solution is better than a two-state solution or maybe a 10-state solution. I think whatever solution we get that provides people with their human rights and their very basic human needs and a platform to strive to flourish on, I'm for that solution. And to the gentleman's point about political power, politicians are really good in a bad way, in the sense that if you create enough pressure, they will go where the wind blows. So I think what me and my family and my partners have been trying to do is create that wind that would make the politicians, and honestly, this is something that has happened in other peace processes around the world, where you'd have people on the ground and people backstage working for a decade or two, and then a politician would come, sign the treaty and get the Nobel Prize. And so I think what we're thinking about is how do we create that wind? And one of the things that we recognize is that when we speak together, an Israeli and a Palestinian, in front of a crowd, it carries a lot of weight, and it provides people with hope at a time where I think I agree, people are very traumatized, and without hope, they're not going to go anywhere. Okay? Without hope, it's very easy to manipulate them into doing the worst things that humans are capable of. And so what we're trying to do is together with partners, create that hope. And there's been the largest peace gathering in Israel in 30 years. Last July, the largest indoor stadium in Israel, with 10,000 people calling for peace. It was difficult for Palestinians from the West Bank, definitely from Gaza, to get there, but there were many Palestinian partners who have an Israeli citizenship on stage in the crowd, together with Jewish Israelis calling for peace. That was the largest peace gathering in Israel for decades. And there are other organizations that have seen renewed energy. Like you mentioned, Standing Together as one. Maybe some of you have heard about it. but it's a joint Jewish Palestinian Israeli organization that has seen a number of its members and its donations skyrocketing in the since October 7th. And so, and they work on, for example, organizing humanitarian aid to Gaza. Jews and Israeli and Palestinians, citizens of Israel together. So there's definitely, don't get me wrong, the country as a whole took a step to the right. But we are definitely seeing also new energy because the people realize that the status quo is not sustainable anymore. So we see renewed energies in the left as well, and for people who are calling for peace. And again, I think we can find partners in the center and in the right as well. I forgot what the question was.
It was based on an observation. My question was also about the influence of external power.
The international has a huge role to play. Sadly, it's not going to happen with Trump in power, even though he's so chaotic that you never know. We have some contacts with very, very weird ways with some of the Saudi ambassador here. If Trump realizes that his family will make money from the Saudis, and in exchange the Saudis ask for a Palestinian state, it might happen in a year. So we really don't know. Is that chaotic? I think it's unlikely. I think the trajectory where this is going is pretty bad, but we don't know. But I think if we in advance, and I'm saying we need to work with fucking assholes. Trump is one. If we can somehow work with him, that would be amazing. I'm not just because he's a horrible person, I don't think we shouldn't work with him. Anyone who can change reality on the ground is a partner. Hamza, who's a friend of mine, originally from the West Bank, is spending now months in DC trying to get contacts into the new administration because we think it might be useful. And again, weirder things have happened. So definitely the international community has a huge role to play, not only in pressuring the Israeli leadership, and I would also say the Hamas and the PA leadership to continue the ceasefire and ultimately go for a diplomatic process. And people here in the UK have a responsibility to pressure their government to do that. So their government, but again, Sauber might be a horrible person, but in this case, we need to see him as a partner. And if we find ways of pressuring the government here to do the right thing, then we should do that, not in advance, decide that we don't want to work with that person because I don't like them for some reason.
We have 10, 15 minutes, maybe enough time for 1, 2, or even 3 questions if we make it quick.
What Trump is not an asshole. I think you're wrong. Trump is very astute. Anyone who thinks he's an idiot is probably thinking about themselves, because Trump is going to achieve what he wants to achieve. He said he wants to end the war in Ukraine, and he will end the war in Ukraine. And he also said he wants all the Palestinians out of Palestine. And if we leave him to his devices, he will achieve that. Please think about it, because if you don't think about it, it will surprise you when it happens. Now, what Trump is doing, which is more important than those two things, is he totally got rid of international law. He's established his own method, imperial method, by an emperor. His will is more important than the whole history of humanity. And that's how he works. There is no international law anymore. For example, ICJ and ICC and the UN and many other less important organizations have declared genocide in Gaza. So, well, did humanity do anything about it? No, because Trump will not allow them to do it, because Starmer will not allow them to do it, because Macron will not allow them to do it, and I could go on with the list. So what Trump is doing is much more and much worse than actually supporting the genocide in Gaza and supporting the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians. He's actually removed international law as a concept, as an order for the society to operate under. So I think if you think about international involvement, it is clear by its absence or its toxic attack on human rights everywhere. I'm against NATO with a really deep feeling. I have been against NATO all my life. NATO is a toxic organization. It attacked so many countries that are not even close to Europe, like Iraq and so on, Afghanistan. But Trump is now saying to the Ukrainians, you don't belong in the discussions. And he's right. He said they started the war. They did start the war. And it wasn't possible to say that. Biden would never say it. He knew his son was involved in starting that war in Ukraine. So what Trump is doing, even when I agree with him politically, because I want the war to end, and all of us probably want the war to end in Ukraine, as we want to end the genocide in Gaza, what Trump is doing, even when he does something good, he does it in a way which is neither democratic, not taking the voices of people that are involved. And that is after America has supported this madness of 1,200,000 people dead from both sides. So I think this at the moment is what is happening. What I suggest should happen is like what happened in 1974 in South Africa. The United Nations decided to remove South Africa from the General Assembly because it was an apartheid state. Now, my dear friends, if it was right to do that in 1974, and remember, apartheid was bad, but actually, both Mandela and Tutu said that Palestine is 1,000 times worse than apartheid was. Apartheid never killed people in a genocide in the way that Israel is doing. So, if it was right in 1974 to say, until you finish apartheid, you are not in the family of man, you're out of the General Assembly, you are suspended until you change that. And of course, they came back when they changed that. How more justified it is to do that now? We should vote, and believe me, it will happen. We should vote to remove Israel from human society because it has not agreed to one UN resolution since 1948, to remove them from the General Assembly as a sanction against their crime. And of course, when they accept those resolutions, they should be invited back. I'm in no doubt that they will not accept that. But I think that's the kind of thing we need to do. We need to remove people from, and we need to do another thing. I want to end. Trump is trying to take 2 million people out of Gaza and throw them at different countries. This is totally unacceptable. This is totally immoral, and this is totally illegal. What we need to do, very simple. They're Palestinians. They come from the rest of Palestine. We need to bring them by UN Resolution 194 back into Israel, because this is where they were expelled from. Now, if you say to me, this cannot be done because Israel will not accept it, Israel has never accepted any single resolution of the UN. So the UN should get rid of its membership until it changes. And then it will start changing. It will not be changing because somebody here is talking to the Saudi representative, because the Saudis don't care a dot about the Palestinian, and have said so and have done that very clearly. And if you don't accept that, then you are not accepting reality.
Thank you. Lady in the green top.
I wanted to go back to when you said about the big peace gathering that you had in Israel, but how much peace was in that peace gathering? How many people in that have refused their military service? So to me, you cannot have peace while there's such a militarized country there. So was that discussed, or was it just that they wanted the war to stop in Gaza?
Sounds like you're looking for reasons not to work with people, but I'll answer anyway. Okay, serving in the military is a difficult question, okay? I can speak about myself. When I was drafted, I made sure that I don't get into the occupied territories. That was my red line. Other people have other red lines. My family grew up in a village that, unless you hold the view that even after the third and fourth generation, all Israelis should leave Israel, then it's not contested territory. Okay, it's within the green, what's called the Green Line border. It's where, if you look between the river and the sea, there's roughly 7.5 million Jewish Israelis, about 7.5 million Palestinians. I think no one is going anywhere, and we need to find a way of living together. And again, trying to explain the Israeli perspective a little bit. When you live in Israel, the threats are not just by terrorism. It's also Iranian missiles being fired at your house. Should someone go in the military to serve in a unit that defends against the Iranian missiles? I think yes. I think people should have the right to defend themselves against attacks. Even and I think the IDF should have never went into Gaza. Okay, but there's definitely units within the Israeli military that are defending Israelis against attacks that are outside of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. So it's worth bearing that in mind. What I'm saying is, and I agree with much of what Haim is saying, I think the military should play a much lesser role in Israeli politics. I wish there would be more generals in parliament, and I wish there would be 50% women, because the current parliament has the least number of women we ever had. Part of it because women don't get to high places in the army, so they don't, that road is blocked. So yes, I think the army generally is a bad influence in Israel, but I wouldn't completely say that it's unneeded and everyone should refuse serving in the military.
Thank you. Time for one more quick question, and I see you over there, but this gentleman has had his hand up for a lot longer.
Okay, so thank you so much. I have a few comments and I'll end up with a question, really quick one.
Thank you all for the great speech and my deepest condolences for your loss. And thank you for feeling the same for all the Palestinian civilians. I want to comment about your view of change. I think change will only be derived by political and economic. It can be interchanged at different time intervals. Political necessity rather than people trying to make a change or wanting to make a change. That does not undervalue what you guys are doing. You're doing a great job. What we can see here that and I'm from Jordan, so I can say a lot about the politics in Israel. So delicate, which are basically the rights represented by Netanyahu, has been trying to represent a certain vision or point of view, which was mentioned in Netanyahu book, A Place Under the Sun in 1994. And this has been failing, and maybe you've witnessed that, witnessing 5 elections in less than 4 years. Okay, so this option is going down, and with this option, a religious state presenting the Zionism will also go down. I don't think there is a space for such state in the whole world, not just the Middle East. Another thing was the peace with Egypt, which was a great example you've given, but you did, I see it in another way. Peace with Egypt was derived by what we can call international powers, which something Israeli different leaders could not believe, even Golda Meir. I think you've heard a lot about it, and I can give you specific details about the 6th of October war. Another thing, Dr. Haim said that last colonization is Israel. So basically, this is for the same reason. I'm not claiming that human beings are going manners and good intentions out of the sudden, but I think we're heading to a world where there's balance of interest rather than balance of power, and which direct power or forceful colonization would be meaningless without preserving the interests of everybody else. My question would be either expelling Palestinians from Palestine or keeping Palestinians there. Okay, but let's assume that all Palestinians were expelled from Palestine. Still, the same question remains on the table, which is the most asked question nowadays in Israel. What is the future of Israel in the region? What are the options that they have? And I'm sorry, I wasn't planning to talk about this, but when you talk about Trump is not trying to get Palestinians out of Palestine, although he says that, but he says that to pressure the Palestinian people, Israeli people, and all Arabic leaders, including ours. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you. And we are almost out of time, so I don't know, that was quite a big question, one last thought, but brief comment.
There were comments.
Yeah.
Just the question about the options of the state of Israel or the country of Israel, whatever.
Yeah, I don't know if we've got time to go into that, but I'm happy to give Dr. Magen the mic.
I wish I had Hamza here with me because he would, but I'm quoting him, so I'm sure you can ask him later. I think we have both in Israeli society and Palestinian society delusional people who think that they can somehow kick everyone else out and take over the land. Ultimately, that's an illusion. Okay, reality is on our side, on the pragmatist side, and I really hope we can call out those illusions so that change happens as quickly as possible. But those are delusions. If someone thinks that they can somehow kick all the Palestinians out, or if someone thinks that they can somehow kick all the Jewish Israelis out, that's not going to happen. And the sooner we realize that and try to work on how do we live together, I think we will all be better.
Thank you. We're actually at the end of time now, so does anybody need to leave? Or can we spare an extra 5 minutes? I know you both have to catch a train.
We have 5 minutes.
5 minutes, okay.
Okay, I promise not to speak for 5 minutes. I think the idea that the Palestinians cannot be kicked out of Palestine is wrong, because they can and they were and they are. And it's depending on what the international community does. Nobody kicked Israelis out of Israel, but definitely Palestinians are being kicked out of their land. And it's not an illusion that more and more of Palestine is taken away from Palestinians every day. It's an illusion to think otherwise. And we need to look reality in the eyes. And this is the situation. The situation is every day, every week, every year, less of Palestine has Palestinians on it. Every day, Israeli Nazis are burning villages, are burning cars, are destroying mosques, are basically destroying Palestine from under the feet of the Palestinians. And your idea is also wrong, I think. I don't know your name. Remember, put yourself in 1989, let's say in the month of May 1989. I'm sorry I give historical examples because I'm a historian. If one of you, a lot of you are my age, if one of you was asked in May 1989, do you think it's possible that the Soviet Union, that amazing empire with nuclear weapons, will be gone in a year, or indeed in 3 months? Of course, you'll send me to a psychiatrist. And yet, that place was gone without a war, without any involvement from outside. It fell because it could not hold together. It couldn't hold itself together. Like the Roman Empire was declining. Like the British Empire. Nobody took the possessions of the British Empire. It actually fell apart. Empires fall apart. That's how they decline and that's how they fall. So you're wrong about international intervention. Now, the Israeli empire is a small empire, but of the small empires that I know of, it probably was the strongest one in history. Friends, it will fall apart like all empires, like the American empire is now falling apart. We have to see the march of history, not just what happens next week or what happened last week. And this is the direction of history. There is no place, I agree with you, there is no place for Israel. There's no place for Zionism. The last colony has to go because we live in the 21st century. And I think the rise of BRICS is probably a sign that those empires, the unipolar empires, have no place in modern history and they need to go, and Israel is part of that.
I'd like to thank both of our speakers. I think they've both given us two very different views. One is about a pathway to peace that is based on enforcement, the end of Zionism, voting Israel to be removed from the UN society, bringing Palestinians back, and the fall of an empire, hopefully, bloodlessly, that'd be lovely. And the other one is working together through a lens of shared trauma and persuading each other to work together based on the fact that it's in their own interest. Yeah. So I also want to thank you, the audience, for your questions. I know there are plenty more. We do have a couple more events coming up for your diaries. On the 27th of March, we've got the head of communications for UNRWA, Juliet Tuma. And on the 5th of April here, we've got a MAP fundraiser. So there will be jazz, there will be food. And on the subject of MAP, we are collecting for medical aid for Palestine. outside, or just out here. So please do donate, and thank you again for all of your time. And to our two guest speakers, Professor Haim Bresheeth and Dr. Magen Inon. Thank you.